So let's talk about international trade, and let's be more specific about it, because perhaps the biggest issue with President Trump has been his relations with China. How would that look different under President Biden than it has under President Trump?
Well, first, I'm not an advisor to the campaign, but I think it's clear that President Biden would focus first on the domestic agenda. And I think that's an important part of looking at trade through the domestic lens. One of the things I think if we look back historically, we've paid insufficient attention to are the domestic policy elements that need to be in place to help workers survive and succeed in a rapidly changing economy, whether that comes from technology or from trade. And as Vice President Biden has said, he wants to build back better, and he wants to focus on making sure we're driving more manufacturing in the United States, rebuilding communities, rebuilding infrastructure. And that, I think, is a necessary foundation for any trade policy. With regard to China, though, specifically, I expect him to be very strong on China. He's going to be very focused on holding China accountable for its policies that have a distortive effect on the rest of the global economy. I would expect him to differ from President Trump in how he might reach out and work with our allies and partners around the world, the Europeans, Canadians, Japanese, other major emerging economies. There's now more of a consensus out there domestically and with our trading partners about the challenge that integrating a China that follows a very different set of rules into the rules-based system, what that challenge is and how to address it. And I would expect a President Biden to take that on first and foremost.
If you were President Xi over in Beijing, would you feel better or worse about a President Biden versus a President Trump?
Well, I think he can probably count on more predictability and engagement, but I would not expect President Biden to be any less firm with China in terms of what he's going to be looking to China to do in terms of state-owned enterprise reform, reform of subsidies, opening up its economy. And that's just on the trade side, leaving aside issues around human rights, Hong Kong, South China Sea, and the rest. I think those issues are going to be very much on President Biden's agenda, but he will do so in a way that is more engaging and more building an international coalition of support around.
Michael, you mentioned our allies. What about trade relations with those? Because President Trump has not limited his tariffs, for example, to just China. He's imposed them on places like Canada and Europe and Australia. What about our allies?
Well, look, I think President Trump, by imposing and threatening to impose tariffs, certainly has gotten the attention of a lot of our allies, including on outstanding issues. I would expect a President Biden to be more focused on strengthening alliances, on strengthening partnerships, but again, not dropping those issues, making sure that we're pursuing those issues, but in a more collaborative way. And that goes for the global trading system more generally. The WTO, the World Trade Organization, is very much in need of reform, and I would expect any Biden administration to pursue that reform aggressively, but not in a way that simply seeks to disrupt or blow up the institution.
Well, and what about U.S. withdrawal from things like the WTO, which is certainly on the table, and other organizations like WHO? There have been several international organizations that President Trump has either withdrawn from or said he might.
Well, look, these organizations tend to serve our interests and our purposes very well, and particularly if we engage. If we have concerns about institutions, then we should be engaging to try to shape them, shape their agenda, shape their operating procedures, not withdrawing from them. And that goes for the WHO, it goes for the WTO, it goes for other organizations as well. And I would expect a Biden administration to be in that mode of engaging to change, engaging to reform, rather than simply taking our ball home.
Michael, one of the things that informs all of our discussion about the economy, about business, about anything in life right now is this pandemic. You have said that you actually think, ironically, there may be an opportunity for large corporations in the pandemic. Where do you see that opportunity?
Well, we've had a debate now over the last couple of years about the role of the corporation in society. It started with Larry Fink's letters and then the Business Roundtable statement. And when the pandemic hit and we saw this health crisis, this economic crisis, the impact on small business, and then also in the United States, the issues around racial reckoning, it has really required corporations to put those words into action. And for a company like MasterCard, we're very focused on inclusive growth. We've been doing this for years, bringing 500 million people into the financial system. And we're very much focusing on mobilizing hundreds of millions of dollars of our products and services and financial support to support small business, to deal with the issues of racial reckoning, to making it less expensive to be poor. Why should Black families pay 50% more for basic banking services than white families, the way they do right now in the United States? We should be able to do something about that. And I think every corporation in their own area has an opportunity to put the words of the BRT into practice and to make it not just a hobby, not just an issue for philanthropy, but part of the core business strategy.
Michael, that is a terribly important issue, and I dare say no one would deny that that needs to be done. But at the same time, can some of these corporations afford it? Because at the same time, because of the pandemic, we've seen corporations really loading up on debt. They're really pressed on their profits. Might they have to give up some of that initiative that you described?
I think that will be a knee-jerk potential reaction, but the reaction should be the opposite. If anything, this crisis shows is that we need to invest in the long term, in healthier communities, in healthier societies, in more inclusive economies. Otherwise, we'll continue to have crises like this. And that's precisely why companies like ours, we partnered with the Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust in the UK to create the accelerator for therapeutics for COVID. Not because we're a public health company, but because we saw that it was in our interest that the development and deployment of a therapy, of a treatment for COVID be accelerated as quickly as possible. And I think that's what companies need to do, is look not just at the short run, but what they need to create long-term value.
Quickly, Michael, you're selling it really well. Are other companies buying it?
You know, I think they are, all in their own ways, and particularly around, for example, issues of racial reckoning in the United States. They're seeing how important it is for their employees, for the communities in which they operate, for their customer base, for their partners. And I think increasingly investors are looking to those companies that take ESG not as a box-checking exercise, but seriously as part of their corporate strategy.
Really important point. Thank you so much to Michael Froman. He is MasterCard Vice Chairman.